The laughter and chatter around the table were abruptly cut short, replaced by a stunned silence that seemed to amplify the sound of beer dripping from my hair onto the floor. Tristan, my husband, stood opposite me, the empty beer can still in his hand, a smug grin fading from his face as he realized the gravity of what he'd just done. "Meredith, I swear, it was just a joke." Tristan tried to defend himself, but the stern look on his father, Douglas's face, suggested this was no laughing matter. "A joke?" I echoed, my voice steady but seething with anger. "Is this what our marriage has come to? Your idea of fun?" "Eliza, calm down," Meredith interjected, her tone dismissive, as if soaking your wife in beer was a trivial matter. "Boys will be boys." "That's enough!" Douglas's voice boomed, slicing through the tension like a knife. "Tristan, apologize to Eliza, now." Tristan's jaw clenched, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the man I thought I married, a man capable of respect, of love. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a scowl directed not at me, but at his father. "I'm sorry, Eliza," he mumbled, the words empty, devoid of sincerity. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the incident laying bare the fractures within our family. Once, I had been a confident, independent woman, but now, living under Meredith and Douglas's roof, I felt like a shadow of my former self, trapped in a cycle of disrespect and enabling behavior. As the evening wore on, the incident with Tristan was glossed over, but the damage lingered, a stark reminder of the growing gulf between us. It wasn't just about the beer or the humiliation. It was about respect, about partnership. And as I lay in bed that night, beside a man who felt more like a stranger with each passing day, I wondered how we had gotten here, how I had allowed myself to become so lost. Douglas's reprimand of Tristan was a small spark in the darkness, a sign that not all was lost, that perhaps there was still hope for change. But as I drifted off to sleep, the laughter and mockery echoing in my mind, I realized that hope was a fragile thing, easily extinguished by the harsh reality of our lives. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of Douglas and Meredith arguing in hushed tones in the kitchen. "He needs to grow up, Meredith. We can't keep coddling him." Douglas insisted. "He's our son, Douglas." "He's just going through a rough patch," Meredith countered, her voice laced with the same denial that had enabled Tristan's behavior for years. Listening to them, I felt a surge of determination. This was not the life I had envisioned for myself, not the partnership I had signed up for. It was time to make a change, to find my way back to the strong, independent woman I once was. But as I stood at the crossroads of my life, the path forward uncertain, I knew it would not be easy. The bonds of family, of marriage, were not easily broken, and the journey ahead promised to be fraught with challenges. Yet, in that moment, as I resolved to reclaim my life, I felt a spark of hope ignite within me, a spark that would, in time, become a blazing fire. The morning after the beer incident was like waking up to the aftermath of a storm. The house was silent, a stark contrast to the usual hum of activity. As I made my way to the kitchen, the memory of last night's humiliation clung to me like a second skin. But today, I refused to let it define me. I found Meredith at the stove, her back turned to me, the air around her thick with the scent of brewing coffee. "Good morning," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Without turning, Meredith replied, "Coffee's almost ready." Her tone was neutral, as if last night had never happened. I poured myself a cup, the silence between us stretching uncomfortably. It was then Tristan walked in, his eyes barely meeting mine as he mumbled a good morning. The tension was palpable, a silent battle of wills taking place in the heart of our home. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make them see how their actions were tearing us apart. But I knew it would only fall on deaf ears. "Eliza, about last night," Tristan began, his voice trailing off as he searched for the right words. I cut him off, my patience worn thin. "Save it, Tristan. Your apologies mean nothing if your actions don't change." Meredith finally turned, her gaze sharp. "Eliza, don't talk to your husband that way. He's trying to apologize." Her words stung, a painful reminder of the chasm between us. "An apology doesn't undo the disrespect, Meredith. Or do you think it's acceptable for a husband to treat his wife like that?" Meredith's lips tightened into a thin line, her silence speaking volumes. The conversation was cut short by Douglas's entrance. His disapproving glance at Tristan was a small comfort, a sign that not everyone was blind to the injustices unfolding within these walls. Breakfast passed in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. It was a silence that screamed of broken bonds and unspoken resentments. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores and strained interactions. It was during these moments of solitude that I allowed myself to reflect on my journey to this point. Once I had been full of dreams and ambitions, a young girl with the world at her feet. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself in the role of the dutiful wife, my dreams sidelined by the needs of others. It was in these moments of reflection that the seeds of resentment began to grow, watered by the constant belittlement and disregard from Tristan and Meredith. Their words, meant to cut deep, only fueled my resolve to reclaim my independence, to prove that I was more than just an extension of their expectations. The day ended as it had begun, with a heavy silence hanging over the house. As I lay in bed next to Tristan, the distance between us felt insurmountable. I realized that the man lying next to me was a stranger, his once endearing quirks now sources of endless frustration. It was clear that something had to change. I could no longer continue living in the shadow of the person I used to be. The humiliation and disrespect had reached a boiling point, and I knew that if I didn't take action, I would be consumed by the bitterness that threatened to overwhelm me. As the night gave way to the early hours of the morning, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan to break free from the chains of this toxic environment, to take back control of my life. It was a daunting task, one that would require all the strength and determination I could muster. But as I drifted off to sleep, I knew it was the only way forward. The path to redemption was fraught with challenges, but I was ready to face them head-on, ready to fight for the future I deserved. The days that followed were a testament to the growing divide within our household. My role had shifted subtly yet significantly from partner to caretaker, not just of the home but increasingly of Douglas, whose health had begun to falter. This new responsibility was not one I shied away from. If anything, it provided a sense of purpose amidst the chaos. "Douglas, you need to eat something," I urged gently, presenting a plate of food to him. His once robust frame had become frail, a shadow of the man who had once commanded respect without uttering a word. "I'm not hungry, Eliza, but thank you," he replied, his voice weak but laced with gratitude. As I cared for Douglas, the criticism from Tristan and Meredith intensified, their barbs more pointed and frequent. "You're smothering him," Tristan would snap, watching with a critical eye as I helped his father navigate the stairs or take his medication. Meredith was no kinder. "You act like you're the only one who cares about him," she accused, her words dripping with disdain as she observed my attempts to make Douglas comfortable. Their cruelty was unrelenting, but my resolve to stand my ground did not waver. Amidst their contempt, a bond had formed between Douglas and me, forged in the quiet moments of care and understanding. It was during these times that Douglas would share stories of Tristan's childhood, painting a picture of a boy who had never faced consequences, his every whim indulged by Meredith's unwavering defense. "It wasn't always like this," Douglas confided one afternoon, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "But we let things go too far. Meredith couldn't bear to see him upset." I listened, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, explaining the man Tristan had become. Despite the harsh reality of our situation, I found solace in Douglas's company, his wisdom a guiding light in the darkness that had enveloped our home. The tension reached a boiling point one evening when a simple misunderstanding turned into a full-blown confrontation. In my haste to prepare dinner while attending to Douglas, I accidentally knocked over a glass of wine, staining the tablecloth Meredith cherished. "That's irreplaceable!" Meredith shrieked, her face contorted with rage as she surveyed the damage. "It was an accident, Meredith. I'll clean it up," I offered, reaching for a cloth, but Tristan blocked my path. "No, let her see what her carelessness has cost," he sneered, his voice cold and unforgiving. The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken words and pent-up frustration. Douglas attempted to mediate, his voice a calming presence amidst the storm. "It's just a tablecloth. Let's not let this ruin our evening." But his words were like a match to kindling, igniting a firestorm of accusations and blame that left no one unscathed. Tristan and Meredith stood united in their disdain, their words cutting deeper than any physical wound could. That night, as I lay awake, the events of the evening replaying in my mind, I realized that my presence in this house was not just a burden to them. It was a mirror, reflecting their own failings and insecurities. The hostility I faced was a testament to their inability to confront the truth about themselves and their son. The bond I shared with Douglas, however, offered a glimmer of hope in the midst of despair. His appreciation for my care was a balm to the wounds inflicted by Tristan and Meredith's cruelty. It was this connection that sustained me, a reminder that kindness and understanding could still flourish even in the most toxic environments. As the days passed, my determination to rise above the hostility only grew stronger. The path ahead was fraught with obstacles, but I was no longer the woman who had walked into this house, meek and compliant. The fire within me had been ignited, fueled by injustice and cruelty, and I was ready to fight back, to claim the respect and dignity that was rightfully mine. The simmering discontent had reached its boiling point, and I knew that the time for action was drawing near. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier with each passing day, a storm cloud ready to burst. Despite the constant tension, I continued to navigate the choppy waters of our household dynamics, my resolve to maintain peace never waning. But as hard as I tried, the balance I sought seemed ever out of reach, the scales tipped too far by Tristan and Meredith's antagonism. It was during a particularly fraught dinner that the delicate balance we'd managed to uphold came crashing down. I had spent the afternoon preparing a meal, hoping to bring some semblance of normalcy to our fractured family. But as fate would have it, a simple mishap would serve as the catalyst for the evening's downfall. As I carried the dish to the table, my foot caught on the edge of the rug, sending me stumbling forward. The meal I had labored over landed in a heap on the floor, my efforts wasted. "Clumsy as ever," Tristan remarked with a sneer, his words cutting through the silence that followed my fall. Meredith's laughter echoed his contempt, her gaze upon me void of sympathy. "You can't do anything right, can you?" Douglas, ever the peacemaker, rose to my defense. "It was an accident. Eliza, are you all right?" But his concern was drowned out by the cacophony of blame and mockery from Tristan and Meredith. Their harsh words felt like physical blows, each one a reminder of the precarious position I held within this family. As I cleaned up the mess, the weight of their disdain pressing down on me, I couldn't help but wonder how much more I could endure. The incident at dinner was not an isolated one. It was a symptom of a much larger issue, a manifestation of the disrespect and malice that had become all too common. In the days that followed, Douglas attempted to mediate the growing rift between us. "We need to find a way to live together in peace," he pleaded, his voice weary from the constant conflict. But his efforts were met with resistance. Tristan and Meredith, united in their disdain for me, refused to see the part they played in the household's discord. Their blame was always directed outward, never inward. The tension reached a boiling point one evening when Tristan's cruelty took on a new form. Returning home late, he barged into the living room where I sat reading, his eyes alight with malice. "I suppose you've been lounging around all day, while the rest of us work," he accused, his words laced with venom. "I've been taking care of your father," I replied, my voice steady despite the anger boiling within me. Tristan's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "My father doesn't need a nursemaid. He needs a family that doesn't include a freeloader." The insult stung, a bitter reminder of how low Tristan's opinion of me had sunk, but it also ignited a spark of defiance within me, a determination to no longer accept his abuse in silence. "Maybe if you showed a fraction of the concern for your father that I do, you'd understand the meaning of family," I shot back, my words a reflection of the frustration and hurt I had kept bottled up for too long. Tristan's response was a glare filled with hatred, a silent promise of further conflict. But in that moment I realized that I no longer feared his anger. The scales had tipped, and with them, my tolerance for the indignities I had suffered at the hands of Tristan and Meredith. As I went to bed that night, the events of the day replayed in my mind. The precarious balance we had maintained had been shattered, the pieces too scattered to ever be put back together. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and confrontation. But one thing was clear. I could no longer stand idly by while Tristan and Meredith sought to diminish me. The time had come to take a stand, to fight back against the injustice that had become my daily reality. The battle lines were drawn, and though the road ahead was daunting, I was ready. Ready to reclaim my dignity, to assert my worth, and to fight for the respect I deserved. The storm that had been brewing was about to break, and I was no longer afraid to face it head-on. The days melded into one another, each bringing its own set of challenges and confrontations. But nothing could have prepared me for the events that would ultimately serve as the catalyst for my transformation. It began like any other day, with the morning light creeping through the curtains and the house stirring to life, but the air was charged with a tension that hinted at the storm on the horizon. Breakfast was a silent affair, the clinking of cutlery against plates, the only sound breaking the uneasy quiet. Tristan and Meredith exchanged glances, their silent communication a language I had grown all too familiar with. Douglas, sensing the brewing storm, cast me a worried look, his concern a balm to my frayed nerves. It was not until later that morning that the dam finally broke. Tristan, emboldened by whatever grievance he had concocted in his mind, launched into an unprovoked tirade against me. "This is all your fault," he bellowed, his finger pointed accusingly in my direction. "You've turned my own parents against me." His words were absurd, a distortion of reality that bore no truth, but they were spoken with a conviction that belied their falsehood. "I've done nothing but support you and your family," I countered, my voice firm despite the shaking of my hands. "Support? You call this support?" Tristan's laugh was bitter, filled with contempt. "You've done nothing but bring discord into this house." Meredith, ever Tristan's ally, nodded in agreement. "You've overstayed your welcome, Eliza. It's time you realized that." The words were a slap in the face, a stark reminder of my precarious position within this family. But it was Douglas's response that marked the turning point. "Enough!" His voice, though weakened by illness, carried the weight of authority it once had. "Tristan, your behavior is unacceptable. Apologize to Eliza now." The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Tristan, faced with his father's rare admonishment, faltered. His face flushed with anger, he stormed out of the room, the slam of the door echoing like a gunshot. In the aftermath of Tristan's outburst, the reality of my situation became painfully clear. The family I had tried so hard to support, to be a part of, was irrevocably broken. And I, caught in the middle, had become the scapegoat for their frustrations and failings. Douglas's attempt to defend me, though heartening, was a stark reminder of the divisions that had formed. His words, though intended to mend, only served to widen the chasm between us. As I retreated to the sanctuary of my room, the events of the morning replaying in my mind, a resolve began to take shape. The humiliation and disrespect I had endured could no longer be brushed aside. It was time to take a stand, to fight back against the injustice that had become a constant in my life. The decision to leave, to extricate myself from this toxic environment, was not made lightly. But as I packed my belongings, each item a reminder of the life I had hoped to build here, I knew it was the only way forward. The confrontation with Tristan, the culmination of years of tension and resentment, was the last straw. It had shattered any illusions of reconciliation, of finding a place within this family. My path, once entwined with theirs, had diverged, leading me away from the pain and toward a future of my own making. As I closed the door behind me, the weight of my decision pressing down on me, I felt not sorrow, but a sense of liberation. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face them. Ready to reclaim my independence, to forge a new path based on respect and dignity. The chapter of my life entangled with Tristan and his family had come to a close, but as I stepped into the unknown, I did so with a newfound strength and determination. The battle may have been lost, but the war was far from over, and I, Eliza, was ready to fight for the life I deserved. The night air was cool against my skin as I walked away from the house that had been my prison for too long. The darkness seemed less daunting than the life I was leaving behind. My steps were uncertain, yet driven by a force stronger than fear, the desire for freedom and a fresh start. As I navigated the quiet streets, my phone vibrated in my pocket, pulling me back to the reality I was trying to escape. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize, but the content left no room for doubt about the sender. Running away won't solve your problems, Eliza. You'll regret this. Tristan's words, even in text form, dripped with venom and the promise of retaliation. I quickened my pace, the threat igniting a spark of defiance within me. Tristan's attempts to intimidate me, to drag me back into the mire of his making, would not sway my resolve. I was done being a victim of his cruelty. The following day, the repercussions of my departure became apparent. News of Tristan's latest escapade, a drunken brawl at a local bar, spread through our small community like wildfire. The incident, which ended with his arrest, was the talk of the town, a public humiliation that laid bare the depths of his recklessness. I learned of the incident through hushed conversations at the cafe where I sought refuge, the whispers of the patrons a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. "Did you hear about Tristan? Completely lost it last night. They had to call the police," one woman said, her voice laced with a mix of shock and morbid fascination. The news, while shocking, was not surprising. Tristan's self-destructive behavior was a path he had chosen long ago, each act of defiance against decency and responsibility leading him inevitably to this point. But it was Douglas's reaction, conveyed to me through a brief, heart-wrenching phone call, that struck the deepest chord. "Eliza, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to come to this," he said, his voice a reflection of his shattered hopes for his son. The conversation was brief, the pain and disappointment palpable even through the phone line. Douglas's acknowledgement of Tristan's failings and his apology to me was a bittersweet vindication of my decision to leave. The fallout from Tristan's actions was swift and severe. His arrest and the subsequent legal troubles served as a form of instant karma, a reckoning for years of unchecked behavior. But while part of me felt vindicated, another part ached for Douglas, who bore the brunt of his son's disgrace. In the days that followed, my resolve to start anew was tested. The temptation to return, to offer support to Douglas in his time of need, was a constant battle. But I knew that going back would mean surrendering the hard-won ground I had gained in my fight for independence. As I struggled with my conscience, a chance encounter provided the clarity I needed. A former colleague, unaware of my personal turmoil, reached out with an opportunity that promised not just a new career, but a fresh start in a new city. The offer was a lifeline, a chance to escape the shadows of the past and build a future on my own terms. It was the sign I had been waiting for, the confirmation that my decision to leave was not just right, but necessary. With a heart heavy with mixed emotions, but a spirit buoyed by the prospect of a new beginning, I made my choice. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but it was mine to walk, free from the chains of a toxic marriage and the specter of Tristan's downfall. As I packed my bags, ready to embark on this new journey, I realized that the night of repercussions was not just the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. The drama and revenge that had marked my days with Tristan were behind me now, replaced by a sense of hope and the promise of redemption. The road ahead was long, and the wounds of the past would take time to heal. But as I stepped into the dawn of a new day, I did so with the knowledge that I was no longer defined by the failures of others. I was Eliza, strong, independent, and free at last. The new city welcomed me with open arms, its bustling streets and vibrant energy, a stark contrast to the life I had left behind. Here, in this place of new beginnings, I found the strength to rebuild, to carve out a space for myself that was untouched by the shadow of my past. But even as I embraced this fresh start, the specter of unfinished business loomed over me, a reminder that true freedom required confronting the demons I had fled. It was during this period of renewal that I received an unexpected call, one that would set the stage for the final act of my departure from Tristan's life. The voice on the other end was familiar, yet fraught with a desperation I had never heard before. "Eliza, it's Meredith. You need to come back. Tristan's in trouble, and he needs you." Her plea, laced with manipulation, was a tactic I had grown all too familiar with. "I'm not coming back, Meredith. Tristan's problems are his own making. He needs to face the consequences of his actions," I replied, my voice steady, a reflection of my newfound resolve. "But he's your husband." Meredith's voice cracked, the veneer of control giving way to panic. "He was my husband. That's in the past now." With those words, I ended the call, cutting the final thread that tied me to the life I once shared with Tristan. The news of Tristan's legal troubles had not gone unnoticed by me. His actions, once merely reckless, had spiraled into criminality, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. It was a path that could only end in ruin, and I refused to be dragged down with him. In the wake of my decision, I took proactive steps to protect myself and ensure that Tristan would be held accountable for his actions. With the help of a skilled attorney, I began to compile evidence of Tristan's misdeeds, documents, and testimonies that painted a damning picture of the man I had once vowed to stand by. The process was grueling, a dredging up of memories I had fought hard to bury. But with each piece of evidence I gathered, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, a sense of empowerment that came from taking control of my narrative. As the case against Tristan began to take shape, an unlikely ally emerged. Douglas, disillusioned by his son's behavior and Meredith's denial, reached out to me with an offer of support. "Eliza, I can't undo the past, but I want to help make things right," he said, his voice heavy with regret. Douglas's support was a turning point, a sign that justice, though long delayed, was finally within reach. Together, we presented a united front, a testament to the fact that Tristan's actions could no longer be swept under the rug. The legal battle that ensued was a public spectacle, a fall from grace that stripped Tristan of his ability to harm those around him. The evidence we had gathered was irrefutable, leading to a conviction that would see Tristan facing the consequences of his actions for years to come. As I stood outside the courthouse, the final verdict ringing in my ears, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that the ordeal was over, and sorrow for the family that had been irrevocably broken by one man's selfishness. The journey to this point had been fraught with pain and hardship. But as I looked to the future, I did so with a heart unburdened by the past. The revenge I had sought was not one of malice, but of justice, a reclaiming of my dignity and a declaration that I would no longer be a victim. The turning point had come and gone, leaving in its wake a path to a new life, one filled with hope and the promise of healing. And as I walked away from the courthouse that day, I knew that the next chapter of my story would be written on my terms, free from the shadows of yesterday. The courtroom's heavy doors closed behind me with a finality that echoed through my very core. The legal battle was over, and with it a chapter of my life that had been marked by struggle and pain. The city around me bustled with life, indifferent to the monumental shift that had just occurred within those courtroom walls. Yet, for me, the world seemed different now, colored by the promise of new beginnings and the sweet, hard-won taste of freedom. In the days that followed, I found myself walking the streets of my new city with a lighter step, each day unwrapping itself like a gift. The job that had once seemed like a mere escape now flourished into a promising career, my efforts acknowledged and my talents nurtured. It was in this environment of support and respect that I rediscovered my passion and purpose, the dark cloud of my past slowly receding into the background. But it wasn't just my professional life that had undergone a transformation. The solitude that had once been my constant companion was gradually replaced by a network of friends and colleagues, relationships built on mutual respect and shared experiences. It was during one such gathering, a casual dinner with friends, that I met Alex. Alex's entrance into my life was unassuming, a slow burn that gradually evolved into something deep and meaningful. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, a dance of words and laughter that filled the spaces in my heart I hadn't realized were empty. With Alex, I found not just love, but a partnership built on trust, understanding, and an unwavering support that I had once thought impossible to find. As my relationship with Alex grew, so too did my sense of self. The insecurities and fears that had once held sway over me began to fade, replaced by a confidence and strength that I wore like a mantle. I was no longer the woman who had walked away from Tristan and his toxic influence. I was someone new, someone reborn from the ashes of my past. Yet, even as I embraced this new chapter, I couldn't help reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The fight for justice against Tristan had been arduous, a battle that had tested my limits and forced me to confront the darkest parts of my soul. But it was a battle I had won, not just in the courtroom, but within myself. The karmic justice that had befallen Tristan was a distant memory, a chapter closed and locked away. Meredith's attempts to reach out, to bridge the chasm that had formed between us, were met with polite indifference. The family I had once longed to be a part of was now just a footnote in my story, a reminder of the trials I had overcome. As for Douglas, our relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect and understanding. His support during the trial had been a beacon of hope, a reminder that not all was lost in the wake of Tristan's destruction. We remained in contact, a tentative connection that served as a testament to our shared history and the resilience of the human spirit. The new dawn that had risen on the horizon of my life was bright with possibility, its light casting long shadows over the remnants of my past. I had emerged from the crucible of my experiences a stronger, more resilient person, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, the city sprawling before me, I realized that this was not just a new chapter, but a whole new book waiting to be written. My story, once defined by drama and revenge, was now a tale of triumph and renewal, a narrative of my own making. With Alex by my side and a future unburdened by the past stretching out before us, I knew that anything was possible. The pain and turmoil that had once defined my existence were now just echoes, faint reminders of how far I had come. This was my new dawn, my chance to live a life defined not by what I had endured, but by what I had overcome. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I knew that I was finally home. I can't take this anymore. Brett's voice cut through the tense silence, his face contorted with rage. Why the hell should I listen to you? My heart sank as I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. What was supposed to be a pleasant family dinner had quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Tessa, my stepdaughter, shot me an apologetic glance before turning to her fiance. Brett, please, this is my family. Family? He scoffed, glaring at me with utter contempt. She's nothing but an outsider who wormed her way into our lives. The insult stung like a slap to the face. Anger and hurt swirled within me, but I forced myself to remain calm. I've been part of this family for over 15 years. Show some respect. Respect? Brett let out a derisive laugh. You don't deserve an ounce of it. Aaron, my husband, finally spoke up. That's enough, Brett. You've gone too far. But Brett wasn't done. He turned his venomous gaze toward Harper, my younger stepdaughter. And you're just her little lapdog, aren't you? Blindly following her lead. Harper's eyes blazed with fury. How dare you talk to us like that? I'll talk however I want, Brett sneered. This is my family now, and I won't have some stepmother and her pet trying to control us. That was the final straw. I slammed my fist on the table, causing the dishes to rattle. Get out of my house, you ungrateful bastard. Chaos erupted as Tessa tried to calm Brett, while Aaron attempted to reason with me. Harper stormed out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. I glared at Brett, every fiber of my being seething with rage. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. As the argument raged on, I knew there was no going back. The insults, the disrespect, it was unforgivable. In that moment, a part of me died, replaced by a burning desire for revenge. Little did Brett know, he had awoken a force he could never comprehend. A mother's wrath. I should have seen the cracks forming years ago, but I was blinded by love and the hope of creating a complete family. It all started when I met Aaron at the office holiday party. He was a divorced father of 2 girls, Tessa and Harper, struggling to balance work and parenthood. I was instantly drawn to his warmth and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his daughters. 6 months later, we were married, and I found myself thrust into the role of a stepmother. Harper, the youngest, embraced me with open arms. But Tessa, already a rebellious teenager, kept her distance. She's not my real mom, she'd mutter under her breath whenever I tried to connect with her. Aaron brushed it off as a phase, but I could see the resentment growing in Tessa's eyes with each passing year. Give her time, he'd say with a reassuring smile. She'll come around. But she never did. The battles became more frequent, over curfews, boyfriends, and eventually her choice of college. Tessa made it clear that I had no say in her life. Stay out of it, Yolanda, she'd snap, her voice dripping with venom. You're not my mother. Each word felt like a dagger to my heart. I tried everything to build a bond with her, but she shut me out at every turn. One night, after a particularly heated argument, I broke down in front of Erin. "She hates me," I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. "No matter what I do, she'll never accept me." Erin pulled me close, his embrace offering little comfort. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'll talk to her. We'll sort this out." But we never did. The years passed, and the chasm between Tessa and me only grew wider. Harper remained my lifeline, the one person in the family who truly understood me. "Don't give up on her," Harper would say, her eyes filled with sadness. "Deep down, she knows you love her." But Tessa's hatred had taken root, festering like an open wound. And when she brought Brett into our lives, everything changed. The first time I met him, alarm bells went off in my head. There was an arrogance about him, a sense of entitlement that set my teeth on edge. "So you're the stepmother," he'd said, his voice laced with disdain. I forced a smile, determined to make a good impression. "It's nice to meet you, Brett. I've heard so much about you." He simply sneered and turned away, leaving me standing there like a fool. From that moment on, Brett became the catalyst that tore our family apart. He fueled Tessa's resentment, whispering poisonous words into her ear, turning her against me and Harper. And now, after that fateful dinner, the bonds that once held us together had been shattered beyond repair. As I lay awake that night, anger burned within me like a raging fire. Brett had crossed a line, and I knew there would be no turning back. It was time to make him pay. Tessa's announcement of her engagement should have been a joyous occasion, a chance for our family to mend the fractures that had formed over the years. But deep down, I knew better. "I want you all to be a part of this," Tessa had said, her eyes shining with hope as she clutched Brett's hand. Harper beamed at her sister, genuinely happy for her. But I couldn't shake the sense of dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. "Of course, we'll be there," Erin promised, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "This is a celebration for all of us." I forced a smile, determined to make the best of the situation. Maybe this was the olive branch Tessa and I needed to finally put the past behind us. That naive optimism was shattered a month later at the engagement party. The evening started off pleasantly enough, with family and friends gathering to toast the happy couple. But as the drinks flowed, Brett's true colors began to show. "To Tessa and me," he announced, raising his glass with a smug grin. "The future Mr. and Mrs. Keaton, starting a new chapter in our lives without any unnecessary baggage." His eyes locked onto mine, the implication clear. Harper must have sensed the tension because she quickly intervened. "Aw, come on, Brett. We're all family here." "Family?" He let out a derisive laugh. "Don't kid yourself, Harper. Once Tessa and I are married, we'll be cutting ties with all the dead weight." A hush fell over the room as everyone processed his words. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Erin stepped forward, his voice strained. "Brett, I think you've had too much to drink. Let's take a break." But Brett wasn't done. He turned his venomous gaze toward me, his words slurring with each insult. "You're nothing but a parasite, leeching off my soon-to-be wife's family. Well, let me make one thing clear. You and your little lapdog over there have no place in our lives." That was it, the final straw. Before I could stop myself, I hurled my glass at him, the contents splattering across his smug face. Pandemonium erupted as guests scattered, screaming and shouting. Erin tried to restrain me, but I was beyond reason. "You miserable piece of trash!" I screamed, struggling against my husband's grip. "How dare you speak to us like that?" Harper rushed to my side, her eyes blazing with fury. "Let's get out of here," she hissed, grabbing my arm. As we stormed out, I caught a glimpse of Tessa's devastated expression. But in that moment, I didn't care. Brett had crossed a line, and there was no going back. We spent the night at my sister Lynette's, Harper doing her best to console me as I raged about Brett's insults. "He's a monster," I spat, pacing back and forth, "and Tessa is too blind to see it." Lynette watched us with a pensive expression, her gaze filled with concern. "You know what you have to do, right?" I froze, meeting her eyes. A silent understanding passed between us. It was time to fight fire with fire, and Brett was about to get burned. In the days following the disastrous engagement party, a dark cloud of anger and resentment hung over me. Brett's vicious words echoed in my mind, fueling the flames of revenge that burned within. Erin tried to reason with me, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. "Sweetheart, think about what you're doing. This isn't the way to handle things. I whirled on him, my eyes blazing. And what would you have me do? Sit back and let that bastard disrespect us like that? He recoiled at the venom in my voice, but I was past the point of caring. Brett had awoken a fury in me that could not be extinguished. Harper remained my steadfast ally, her unwavering support a lifeline in the storm. "Don't listen to Dad," she said, squeezing my hand. "We'll make Brett pay for what he did." Her words were like balm to my wounded soul. At least someone understood the depths of my pain. It was then that Lynette dropped a bombshell. She had connections that could expose the skeletons in Brett's closet. "The guy's been cooking the books at his company for years," she revealed, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Embezzlement, fraud, you name it." A wicked grin spread across my face. "Perfect. It's time we brought that scumbag down a few pegs." Harper's eyes widened, but she didn't protest. Instead, a matching grin tugged at her lips. Over the next few weeks, Lynette fed us information about Brett's shady business dealings. The more we uncovered, the more my hatred for him grew. Aaron, oblivious to our machinations, continued his efforts to reconcile. "Tessa's devastated," he'd say, his brow furrowed with worry. "She needs her family right now." I scoffed at his words. She made her choice when she decided to marry that piece of trash. Don't expect me to feel sorry for her. The rift between us deepened, with Aaron growing increasingly frustrated with my stubbornness. But I didn't care. My sole focus was on making Brett pay. As the wedding date loomed closer, the tension in our household became palpable. Tessa's phone calls grew more desperate, he pleading with us to attend the ceremony and support her. "Please, Mom," she'd beg, her voice thick with tears. "I need you there." The use of that word, Mom, sent a pang through my heart, but the wound Brett had inflicted was too raw, the betrayal too deep. "I'm sorry, Tessa," I'd reply, my voice devoid of emotion. "But I can't be there for you this time." Harper remained steadfastly by my side, her loyalty unwavering. "Don't let her guilt you," she'd say, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "We're in this together." And together we would strike, unleashing a storm of retribution that would leave Brett's world in ruins. As the wedding day drew near, the calm before the storm settled over us. But I could feel the electricity crackling in the air, the promise of vengeance waiting to be unleashed. Brett had no idea what was coming for him. The days ticked by with agonizing slowness as Tessa's wedding drew near. Each time the phone rang, I steeled myself for another round of pleading and guilt-tripping. "Mom, please," Tessa would beg, her voice thick with desperation. "I need you there. It wouldn't be the same without you." I could hear the tears in her words, but my resolve remained unshaken. "I'm sorry, Tessa, but you made your choice when you decided to marry that monster." Harper would squeeze my hand, a silent show of support as I delivered those harsh words. She understood the depths of my pain, the utter betrayal I felt at Brett's hands. Aaron, ever the peacemaker, tried in vain to reason with me. "Sweetheart, this is tearing our family apart. Can't you see how much this is hurting Tessa?" I rounded on him, my eyes blazing with fury. "And what about how much Brett has hurt us? Don't you dare try to make me feel guilty for standing up to that piece of trash." He recoiled at the venom in my voice, utterly helpless in the face of my wrath. Lynette, bless her soul, remained my steadfast ally. "Don't let them get to you," she'd say, her voice low and conspiratorial. "We've got the goods on Brett, and it's time to make him pay." With her help, we compiled a dossier of evidence, financial records, emails, and witness testimonies that painted a damning picture of Brett's illegal activities. Embezzlement, fraud, insider trading, the list went on and on. As the wedding day drew closer, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. The storm was gathering, and Brett had no idea what was about to hit him. The night before the ceremony, I sat alone in the darkness, clutching the damning evidence in my hands. Memories of Brett's insults, his utter disrespect, flooded my mind, stoking the flames of vengeance that burned within. This wasn't just about teaching him a lesson. It was about protecting Harper, ensuring that she never had to endure the pain and rejection I had suffered at his hands. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Harper slipped into the room, her eyes shining with determination. "It's time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, rising to my feet. Together we marched into the night, the weight of our mission heavy on our shoulders. As the first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, the authorities were already in motion, armed with the evidence we had provided. Brett's world was about to come crashing down around him. The morning of Tessa's wedding dawned bright and clear, a cruel mockery of the storm that was about to be unleashed. Harper and I arrived at the venue early, slipping into the back of the ceremony hall like two silent wraiths. We kept our distance, watching from the shadows as the guests began to arrive. Aaron tried to approach us, his face etched with worry and confusion. "Delia, Harper, what's going on? Why are you hiding back here?" I met his gaze, my expression cold and unyielding. "Don't worry about us, Aaron. Just enjoy the show." Before he could protest further, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Raised voices and the sound of scuffling reached our ears, cutting through the excited chatter of the guests. Tessa appeared, her beautiful white gown billowing around her as she rushed toward the disturbance. "What's happening? Brett, where are you?" That's when we saw him. Brett, disheveled and wild-eyed, being led away in handcuffs by two stern-faced officers. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as they took in the shocking scene. Tessa's face drained of color, her hands flying to her mouth in horror. "Brett, what's going on? Why are you being arrested?" He tried to struggle free, his voice a desperate snarl. "It's all lies. Those bitches set me up." His eyes found mine in the crowd, and for a moment our gazes locked. A twisted smile curved my lips as I reveled in the sweet taste of revenge. The officers hauled him away, his curses and threats echoing through the hall. Tessa collapsed to her knees, great heaving sobs racking her body as the reality of the situation sank in. Harper gripped my arm, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. "You did it," she breathed. "You really did it." I nodded, unable to tear my gaze away from the unraveling disaster before us. Guests were fleeing in droves, their faces etched with disgust and disbelief. Tessa's bridesmaids hovered around her, their expressions a mixture of pity and embarrassment. Aaron pushed his way through the chaos, his face pale and drawn. "Delia, what have you done?" I met his gaze, my expression unapologetic. I did what needed to be done. Brett got exactly what he deserved. He shook his head, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "This isn't how we handle things. You've gone too far." But I didn't care about his disapproval. In that moment, all that mattered was the sweet taste of victory, the knowledge that Brett's reign of terror was over. As the dust settled and the venue emptied, Tessa remained a crumpled figure on the floor, her dreams and hopes for the future shattered around her. Harper squeezed my hand, a silent understanding passing between us. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Brett's downfall was just the beginning. In the days following the disastrous wedding, the news of Brett's arrest and the subsequent fallout became the subject of intense media scrutiny. Overnight, Tessa and her disgraced fiance became social pariahs, their reputations in tatters. "Can you believe this?" Harper would exclaim, brandishing the latest tabloid article with a mix of glee and disgust. "They're calling him the embezzling ex-fiancé." I couldn't help but revel in Brett's public humiliation, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me each time his name was dragged through the mud. Tessa, for her part, remained holed up in her apartment, refusing to answer calls or face the world. Aaron tried desperately to reach out to her, but his efforts were met with stony silence. "She's devastated," he confided in me, his eyes filled with a mix of pity and frustration. "I don't know how to help her through this." I scoffed at his words, my contempt for Tessa's wallowing evident. She made her bed when she chose that scumbag over her own family. Don't expect me to feel sorry for her. As the weeks dragged on, the consequences of Brett's actions rippled outward, affecting those closest to him. Business partners severed ties, friends distanced themselves, and his once promising career lay in ruins. It was during this time that I finally confronted him face to face. Harper and I had made a habit of staking out his apartment, reveling in the schadenfreude of watching him slink home each night, a shell of his former arrogant self. One evening as he emerged from the building, his shoulders hunched and his eyes downcast, I couldn't resist the opportunity. Well, if it isn't the disgraced ex-fiancé himself," I called out, my voice dripping with disdain. He whipped around, his eyes widening in recognition and fury. "You!" he spat, his hands curling into fists. You did this to me, you crazy bitch. Harper moved to intervene, but I held up a hand, silencing her. This was my moment, and I intended to savor it. No, Brett, I said, my voice laced with venom. You did this to yourself. All I did was expose the truth about the kind of lying, cheating scumbag you really are. His face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But Harper's presence seemed to give him pause, and he settled for hurling insults instead. You're going to pay for this, he snarled. Mark my words, you and your little brat are going to regret the day you crossed me. I threw back my head and laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. Regret? The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. You got exactly what you deserved, you miserable excuse for a human being. With that, I turned on my heel, leaving him seething in impotent fury. Harper fell into step beside me, her eyes shining with admiration. That was amazing, she breathed. You really showed him. I nodded, a sense of triumph swelling within me. Brett's threats rang hollow. He was a broken man, his power and influence stripped away. It was then that Tessa finally emerged from her self-imposed exile, her face haggard and her eyes rimmed with dark circles. She sought me out, her expression a mixture of sorrow and shame. Mom, she began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. I was so blind, so incredibly stupid. I regarded her coolly, my anger still simmering beneath the surface. You're right about that. You chose that piece of trash over your own family. Tears welled in her eyes, and she dropped to her knees before me, a broken woman. I know, and I'm so sorry. Please, you have to believe me. I never meant for things to get so out of hand. Harper hovered nearby, her expression softening as she watched her sister's anguish. I remained unmoved, my heart hardened by years of rejection and pain. Sorry doesn't undo the damage, Tessa. You broke this family, and I don't know if we can ever truly put it back together. Her shoulders shook with sobs, and for a moment I felt a twinge of pity. But the memory of Brett's insults, his utter disrespect, quashed any impulse toward forgiveness. I'll do anything, Tessa pleaded, her voice choked with tears. Anything to make things right again. I gazed down at her, my expression impassive. We'll see about that. But mark my words, Tessa, the path to redemption won't be an easy one. As she wept at my feet, I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and arduous journey. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that our family might one day be whole again. In the aftermath of Brett's downfall, the road to healing was a long and arduous one. Tessa remained steadfast in her remorse, her pleas for forgiveness a constant refrain. I know I don't deserve it, she would say, her eyes brimming with tears. But please, give me a chance to make things right. Aaron, ever the peacemaker, urged me to extend an olive branch. She's our daughter, Delia. We have to try and move past this for the sake of our family. I would regard him coolly, my anger still simmering beneath the surface. She made her choice when she chose that scumbag over us. Why should I forgive her now? Harper, caught in the middle, tried her best to mediate. Mom, she's really trying here. Can't you see how much she's hurting? I would soften, if only a little, that at Harper's words. Our bond, forged in the fires of betrayal, remained unbreakable. Slowly, grudgingly, I began to entertain the idea of reconciliation. Tessa's constant presence, her unwavering efforts to make amends, gradually wore away at the walls I had erected around my heart. It was during one of our strained family dinners that the breakthrough finally came. I know I can never undo the pain I've caused, Tessa said, her voice trembling with emotion. But I swear to you, from the bottom of my heart, that I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity, and for the first time I felt the icy grip of anger begin to thaw. Harper reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. Give her a chance, Mom, please. I met Tessa's gaze, searching for any trace of deception, any hint of the selfishness that had once consumed her. But all I saw was raw, unguarded remorse. With a heavy sigh, I nodded. All right, but understand this, it's going to take time. A lot of time. Tessa's face crumpled with relief, tears streaming down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. From that day on, the healing process began in earnest. It was a slow, often painful journey, fraught with setbacks and emotional landmines, but Tessa remained steadfast, her commitment to making amends never wavering. Aaron, his eyes shining with pride, watched as our family began to knit itself back together. "I knew you could do it," he murmured, pulling me into a warm embrace. Harper, my constant ally, beamed with joy as the rifts between us gradually closed. "I told you she was worth another chance," she said, her voice filled with affection for her sister. As for me, I navigated the path to forgiveness with cautious optimism. The wounds ran deep, the scars of betrayal still tender. But in Tessa's unwavering remorse, I saw a glimmer of hope, a chance to reclaim the family I had once cherished. It would be a long road, paved with difficult conversations and hard-won trust. But for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that we could emerge from this crucible stronger, more resilient, and more tightly bound than ever before. The path to redemption had been set, and though the journey would be arduous, I knew in my heart that we would walk it together as a family.